So the next step is, figuring out how to tackle that. So the way I normally approach this, and is what I'm going to do here, is I get started with figuring out what the repository is for Jazzy. Let's do Jazzy GitHub. So I've looked at it before. It's from Realm. So let's go here. First thing is fork it. I'm going to fork it to UpTech. So now let's get the URL and then create a new tab real quick. cd dot git clone. All right, so let's set up a new tmux session for this. This is just how I prefer to organize my work. I use tmux inside of Alacrity, which is a terminal written in Rust using OpenGL. It's super performant, but it's also super minimalist. So like the terminal itself doesn't have tabs or features like that. But I've always been a fan of using tmux anyways. So what I do is I use tmux sessions to break things apart into projects. So right now you can see Constraid is open. I have dash user contributions, which is the repository that I made a pull request to add the Constraid doc set for dash to, so that would get submitted and other people would be able to download the docs through dash and look at the docs through dash. And I just created a new session for Jazzy. So now when I go to that session, I can create as many windows as I want in that session, and I'm in the directory for Jazzy. So to get started, I usually check out a rake file and see what's going on. Looks like they have some nice little bootstrap thing that handles doing the bundle install and the git submodule update. Looks like they also have a rake tests for running spec files and unit tests, and some specific specs so you don't have to run the entire suite, and some Rubicop, source kit and stuff. So based on this, you can also look at the README. So what do we see? Whoa, allow access. Okay, here's the README. Usage, installation. So it's a Ruby gem. You just gem install it to use it, by the way. This gives you some examples of supported keywords and how they do this, how you actually build your documentation, etc. In our case, it's super simple. The development section just said we need source kitten, which I already have, and you need bundler, which I already have set up as well. But yeah, it doesn't tell me a lot in terms of development other than what I already knew. So let's try the bootstrap thing. Okay, it looks like I have all the dependencies already. It's cloning all the submodules. A lot of submodules. Looks like these are all the integration spec projects I'm guessing it uses to test things. My cat is freaking out. One of them. Okay. So now that we've done that, the next thing I guess I would do is run the specs, which I can't remember. We just looked at it. But the task inside that was spec. So we can do rake spec, Oops, not RSpec, rake spec. So this should run the automated test suite, and hopefully we'll be in a green state. The reason I'm doing this is just to find out if, you know, on master everything's in a green state, because it would suck to start developing stuff and then run the tests and find out things are failing, only to find out that, you know, if I had originally run the tests, things were failing there as well. I could sink a bunch of time into, you know, thinking that my changes were actually causing problems when they weren't. So I run the entire suite. This can take a little while depending on the projects, of course. Different projects have more tests, less tests, more complicated tests. It looked like only by the naming of things in that rake file that it was all just integration tests. I don't know if that's 100% the case, but the integration tests are usually their heavier, longer running tests anyways. So right now, I mean, we can see by looking at my CPU is spiking right now. Source kitten was going nuts. So Source kitten's using 300% of the CPU for a minute there. So Source kitten is a tool, a command line tool that someone wrote around SourceKit, which is a framework that Apple produced. That is what is used to kind of parse the abstract syntax tree and get information about the project and the actual code in the project. Looks like it's still going, doing this Cocoa Pods. Takes time. I know all this stuff takes time to run test suites like this, but I can't tell you how many times I've not done this because it takes time sometimes, and I've lost way more hours for stupid reasons later on. So it's definitely worth waiting, in my opinion. It's important to know whether the software is working as it's intended to be working. This is quite a long time with no output, but it's clearly doing something. Source kitten keeps popping back up in terms of CPU usage. Oh, there we go. We got some output. All right. So the test suite finally finished. So we know that we have 0 failures. We had 0 errors, 0 failures in all of the cases, and it ran the full test suite. So we know we're in a green state in master. So the next thing I do is create a branch for what I want to do. And in this case, actually, we forgot to do something. So we forked it and we cloned it, but we need to set our upstream. So git remote add upstream. What this lets me do is, now that I have 2 different origins, now I can pull upstream's origin into my master and keep my fork in sync with the actual upstream, which is the official repository. But I never want to commit or push directly to that upstream. That's just there for me to pull stuff down when other people put stuff in it. So now we can create the branch. So let's create a branch. Let's call this fix dash docset index. Okay. So let's make sure. Let's go back to constraint, where we're going to be generating the docs. Let's make sure that docs directory is cleared out so we can do a fresh build. So let's try to build, if we go back to Jazzy real quick. If we look in Jazzy, there's a bin directory, and usually either for most command line tools or execute like libraries or things in Ruby that are gems, you usually either have a bin directory or an exec directory or exe directory. And the bin directory model is kind of an older directory structure pattern, and the newer one has it in the exe directory. But so I noticed that there was bin here, and I look in there and it looks like there's a Jazzy file in there, and we look at that, and that's kind of like a stock-ish starter file to launch the actual command using bundler. So we can see, it requires Ruby gem, set the bundler setup, loads the file paths, and requires the gem, and then does Jazzy doc builder, blah blah. So this is like the main entry point for this. So we should be able to run it the same way we would run the normal one, but from master. Because the other thing I want to test right now is to make sure that even though I have the latest official stable installed, maybe somebody's already fixed this problem in master. So I want to run Jazzy bin Jazzy. So let's just run the build. So Jazzy is going to go off. It's going to build some documentation. It's parsing all the files in the library. It gives us some warnings, which are a side effect if we read them closely. They're a side effect because this is a cross-platform, it's a cross-platform library for Mac and iOS, and therefore I have pound if conditions inside of the code base, and it basically says, hey, are you sure you have the module loaded that you need loaded? If you use all the modules, blah, 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 but if this is because of pound if, please ignore. And it is because of pound if, so we can ignore. So we produced all the docs. We can go in here. We can look at the docs that are produced. So you can see, here's the documentation it just produced. We can click into, different methods or whatever. Gives us the details of the methods, the parameters. This is all documentation that I wrote in the code using a standard kind of Apple documentation format. And Jazzy just interprets that standard format just as well as Xcode. And so that's what allows Jazzy to produce all this. So we'll notice global variables, enumerations, extensions, functions, and type aliases. These headers were actually the things that didn't have the types. So they're just sections in the documentation. So that's something to keep in mind. So let's actually see. So the -doc set is actually stored in this docsets folder that's produced by Jazzy. And we can see there's this constraint tar.gz, which is actually the packaged doc set. And then the exploded one, or the one that it would built it in and then compressed, is this constraint.docset, which has contents inside of it, and that has resources inside of it. And that's where we see this docset ds-idx file that Capelli was talking about. And sorry, my cat is freaking out. So we should open that up and make sure that it's not magically fixed. Because if it's magically fixed, then that means before the last or the most recent stable release and whatever's in master, somebody's already fixed this problem. So I can never remember the name, SQL Pro for SQLite. So let's do open-a SQL Pro for SQLite and open that file. Okay, so here we go. We can see there's the master, SQLite master, and then there's the search index table, which has, just like the documents described, an ID and name, type, and path. And if we look at the data, and we can see there's some examples in here. So here's like the expand method, which is type function, and the path is the relative URL to that function. We can see these aliases and so forth. And down here at the bottom, we can see those null type ones, which are problematic. So this is clearly still a problem even in master at this point. So what we do need to do is figure out how to fix that. And I guess we should also, another good thing to do, which I briefly did, but I'll show you just so it's something that you can think about doing as well, is I did search through the Jazzy issues. I just searched for docset to see if any of the issues that are existing and opened, you know, are not working or seem familiar to the scenario that I have. So it doesn't generate proper docset without module. That may be related. No, this guy's saying it's not producing a docset at all, basically, without the module flag, which is not what we're seeing. Make arguments consistent. Jazzy doc is not working given source kit in there. We're not getting source kit in there. Feature stable, blah, blah, blah. So none of these really are applicable to the issue we're having. So the reason I was checking was to see if, you know, if somebody had already posted that issue, there could be some useful context or discussion that occurred inside of that issue. But since there wasn't, you know, if I wasn't feeling like going and trying to figure out how to fix this and do it myself, or if I, you know, get into this and we decide that, you know, this is too complex and I don't have the time to actually go figure this out, then I will go back and make an issue for this so that other people are aware of it and other people could go and fix it. But hopefully we can, you know, get into it and figure it out and then submit a fix.